very different backgrounds. So Abhishek was a software engineer with Yahoo and Amazon, became a VC with Axel, and then started Tracxn. So that's his journey, and which Tracxn, by the way, IPO'd. And Deepu, meanwhile, he is also from Kerala, that's great. And he was a doctor, and then he became an entrepreneur. And he's one of the few successful startups to have come out of Kerala. So we are going to tap into both of them to figure out how did they manage to achieve scale when that's been the biggest struggle that we've seen. We have no dearth of ideas. We have like fantastic startups coming up from all corners of India, but then scale is a problem. So we're going to try and find out from them. So starting with Abhishek. So tell us about how your time at Axel as a venture capitalist helped you gain some insights which led you to start Tracxn. How important is it for a founder to have some unique insights, market insights into a certain space before starting up in that space?
So I spent 3 years at a VC firm looking at early stage companies day in and day out. And over time I realized that there were a bunch of problems that we were constantly doing again and again. And if the same company meets another venture firm, they would do the same exercise. So it was built out of our own personal needs. Both me and Neha, co-founders, we both used to work for venture funds. There was one serendipity moment where a company met me and the next day that same company met Neha. And we ended up doing the same exercise of finding who else exists in that market. And there was a little bit of a light bulb moment thinking that instead of two of us doing the same work, maybe somebody should do it centrally and make it available to all of us. So a lot of ideas are born out of personal needs of people working in that industry. And because you have gone through that journey, it's very easy to relate to the problem and build a solution for that. And our genesis happened like that. And over the last 15 years, I have seen a lot of ideas become large. Usually, like a bulk of them fall into these two categories. People go through a journey and find a problem for which they are not able to find a solution and they decide to build it. Or another way is that a big buzzword is happening and a global company is really scaling well and a lot of people in different countries starts to clone it. But these are the two broad buckets that we saw a lot of companies getting created. I feel that if you solve something which is born out of your personal need, you relate to that problem a lot more and you remain committed when the chips are down. So it's usually good to start with a problem which you personally relate to.
What about you, Deepu?
Hi, namaskaram. I think it is important to draw a bit of context of how I got started. So as Malavika mentioned, I'm from Kerala. I did most of my schooling and everything in Kerala and studied at Kottayam Medical College. I've been a physician, then I did my MD in general medicine. So pretty much I know to an extent what happens here and how we have evolved over the last decade from more of a services-oriented community to building startups and product. And so that context I thought I lay. And post that I went on to find a company called Dailyrounds. It essentially, we train most of the Indian doctors, almost 80% of the Indian doctors use one of our products called Dailyrounds and Marrow. We kind of, very early stage, we started from Kerala. Then we moved to Chennai and Bangalore. Now we're based out of Bangalore, we're a team of around 500 people. And as I mentioned, right, so we take pride of our Kerala roots a lot. One of our co-founder, Nimi, is also from Kerala. To answer your question, I think the early stage, I find it put into two categories. One is that you're very clear on what to do, and one idea strikes you and you go all about it, right? So that's I believe is a small percentage of us. For rest of us, I'm pretty much sure a lot of people who are sitting in the audience, you are already working at a job or you have a services company. In my case, I was working as a physician, and you have this one small idea and you always wanted to do something or build something, right? So you're seeing, you got inspired by people actually running things and building things. So that I think is the 80% of the population. And the idea is that how do you act on it, right? And what happens when you act on it. So I think it's important to act on it is what I would say. Whatever you are doing, just do it and put it out there. And that's what very heartening to see that a lot of products are actually being displaced and acting on it. The next is that once you act on it in the early stage, there will be a lot of people saying positive things about it. Because, in my case, none of my batchmates, none of my college mates, nobody had done anything as a founder. So there is a natural bit of positive feedback that comes in, which I believe is helpful initially, but later on it is just pretty self-feeding, right? So you get, why would anybody say anything negative to you, right? I think in specifically home or Kerala, what I found is that the critical feedback really lacks. Because people are very nice. They might say negative things behind your back, but you're usually getting a very positive feedback, which might not transcribe to a product success or a business success, right? So that's something I think I got validated from Bangalore actually. Like what I used to do is that I used to go to Bangalore. One of the founders of etc. They were also from Kerala. So I had to, I spent time with them. That's when I realized that whatever I find as a success yardstick is not good enough for a global market or at least for an India market. So probably I need to really work on that idea even further and go through that pain, right? So, so my idea suggestion, so yeah, my thought is that early stage you have an idea, work on it, but immediately put it out and then get some brutal feedback, which might make it or break it. But I think that's part of it is.
So we hear a lot of talk about the 0 to 1 journey, but the -1 to 0 journey is also equally important, right? So can you shed a little light into that? Like, because most of the founders or the audience here are in the before a startup, thinking about a startup stage. How did you, or what did you, like now that you have grown a startup and you've done it for so many years and have also invested in many, how would you say that, what are the things, did you have any doubts from your experience, something that these guys can learn from on that -1 to 0 stage?
Yeah, I think the context is important. When I started, let's say 7 years back, 8 years back, -1 to 0, I assume that you're pretty much like really wanting to do something, but really don't know what to do. And you have a pigment of idea which you might be able to work on it. So when I was at that stage, all you could do was basically do it or try to do it. But I think the situation has totally changed. Pretty much a lot of information is out there online. So you don't have that asymmetry information arbitrage there. So this -1 to 0 journey, if at all anything, I believe is, as of now, you have to get a lot of research done, right? And that I find is totally lacking in our community, specifically from here. I was telling you the example that do you do a basic competitor analysis, or do you actually see if this product or idea has worked across the globe? And I have literally met few startups who have built products exceptionally good, but little too late, right? So they would have had another 100 ideas they could have worked on. Probably they had timed it well. So I think in the -1 to 0 journey, in this time and age, I would say one is that of course you're going with your idea, try to put it out there, but do a very deep market research, basically a deep Google search, basically use products even like Tracxn, and figure out what is actually happening in that vertical. And the world is pretty homogenized, right? So you unless you are selling specifically for Kerala market, by default you are actually selling for the Indian market at least from day one. So that means you need to be aware of what's actually happening in the industry. So you have way more patterns now to really identify, right? So maybe spend half of your time identifying the patterns and the markets that's when you actually will identify the gap. For example, I started with a social networking product for doctors. Took off, it was quite nice. People gave so much good feedback, and it was called Dailyrounds. It went out really well. We raised funds from all the VCs, Accels, Vinos, etc. But what happened is that it did not make money. It did not make the money we expected it to make. And that's when we actually started looking back to the market and realized that hey, the entire tech market is quite open and nobody's there in that vertical. And that's when we added a new vertical called Marrow, which kind of helped us grow really well, right? So all I'm saying is that all this happened because of looking back. I suggest that even have that idea of looking back in the very early stage. Literally, if you are building something, if you take half of your time every day to just go and understand what is actually happening in the market, what products are being built, what are your global, Indian, even local competitors, and how do you differentiate with them, what are their revenues. Most of the revenue of any company is out there in the MCA website, right? So I wonder why don't we look at, so when you say that maybe it's a small vertical, if you have an indirect competitor, if you really know what their revenue are making, that gives a very good insight into going. Right? So that's one take point. Yeah, I think that.
Thanks for that. I personally found it very useful. So over to you, Abhishek. Can you tell us about a few of the choices you had to make, or probably the risks, things that you had to say no to when you decided to start up?
So, I think when we started, both me and Neha has been a bunch of boards. We were both working with funds, so at least we had seen 2-3 journeys where company really scaled well. And every time we would bring a company to our IC, the biggest conversation point was defensibility or moat. Which it takes a while for you to start building up that muscle, but essentially now if you ask me what moat is after 10 years of building Tracxn, if I want to step down and start a competing company, can I build something which will be able to compete with Tracxn or not? If the answer is no, you have a true moat. And that is what defines defensibility. And I think when we started, we speak to a lot of customers, figuring out what to build. We had some ideas, we spoke to a lot of customers, figuring out what problems they had and what we could solve. I think we picked up 2 key parameters. One was defensibility. Whatever you build, somebody should not be able to replicate it easily. If it is replicable, you will have competition, and if there is competition, never have profit pools. It is very hard to make large profit pools if your solution is easily replaceable. And that was one big parameter. And I'll give you an example. I would go and meet a lot of venture capital firms in Bali. And the first thing they would say is that, look, can you hire me an analyst in India who will do a lot of grunt work that we do? It will be 1/4 the cost, will save a lot of money. While that would scale the business quickly, that business has very little defensibility. Any company, after we scale to let's say 500 people, any company can hire 10 analysts and start competing with us on pricing. And then your profit pools can shrink. So we didn't build that. We built a productized offering for the same work. So we would ask them that what work that you will give to this analyst. So they said that, look, usually we need bunch of things. One is, I'm looking at a sector. Like today, Gen AI is hot. All investors are looking to meet all generative AI companies out of a geography. We said that instead of giving you the person to do it, we'll make that as a product and give you as a product. Because then the secret sauce is behind. So moat was one of the biggest factors that we used to figure out which one to build. And second one was relatively smaller, which is capability building. You will not solve one problem for your customers, we will solve n number of problems, and you want to pick something which has defensibility but also allows you to build skill set which you can use to build next set of features for them. In our case, because it was a big suite, it mattered, but in a lot of cases it will not matter as much. But defensively was the single biggest reason on which we decided which product to build first.
Deepu, can you take us through a few of the challenges that you faced? Now coming to the 0 to 1 part of the journey, initial years, what are the main challenges that you faced? and how did you go about tackling those?
Yeah, sure. I'll focus on the challenges which probably are relatable to the broader audience, because I believe a lot of things fall into a pattern, right? So it's pretty much, and I will probably touch on some things which are not often discussed. So one of the things is that you're obviously telling a story and faking it initially, right? So there's no doubt about that, right? So nobody knows anything anyway. If you're so good and if you are a great product, anyway you would be starting so small, right? So that's absolute truth, right? You're actually creating something from thin air and telling a story and selling the vision and selling the hope, right? So that's for sure. It was the same for me as well. I had no clue what I was doing. I knew I had to do something, and I had a figment of an idea which I thought I could work on. So that's very clear. But I think the challenge is that at what point do you stop faking and then convert it into a real product? And how much do you kind of, for lack of better word, bullshit to yourself, right? So you cannot really have an idea, but you yourself don't really believe in it, right? In my case, that there was several instances where I knew certain parts of the product was working, but a lot of part of the business was not working. But my pitch deck would always contain that it's going to grow 100x, right? Maybe the idea was to raise funds, attract better employees and all of it. But at one point, I also started realizing that, hey, this is not going to pan out, right? So then, would you even keep trying? Because maybe there's a chance to work it out. But maybe when you realize, how do you move away from that? How do you pivot? Or how do you readjust your business, right? So that seems to be one of the fundamental challenges I had early on the business, specifically. The second challenge, of course, I had was the network, which I probably believe a lot of you guys might also face. Let's say if you go to a B school, by default, your B school alumni becomes a great network to get started, right? So if you're not from I was from a medical background. I have friends who have started or seniors who have started hospitals, but that's it, right? There's no background or network really forming, and I'm not hiding the fact that it helps. It certainly helps, but when you don't have any of the network or anything, how do you use it to your advantage, right? So probably that may put you. I mean, I'll put it this way: if I had known that building a company is this hard, and if I had known how to read a balance sheet or a profit loss statement, I would not have started, right? So because of the sheer complexity of running a business, I would have really thought, hey, this just doesn't look something as a physician I would be able to build it, right? Or let's say the complexity that most of your employees would, in the early stages, it is so hard to find a good person to work with you. If I had known that, I would not have started, right? But since I don't know any of this, you get started and then one thing can lead to another thing, right? So the second challenge I faced was network or information, access, credibility and all of those things. But I think that's something we all face. The third specific challenge I would say which I faced was that probably the team, building the team, I like bringing the best people. I used to again try too hard about it, but I think things started working when I was being very realistic and being very transparent and genuine to it. I would literally say that, hey, this is my background and I'm trying to do this. Would you like to work with me? And then I've seen people really being very open about it to come to work with you or support you in that. When you're not trying to sell too hard or when you're actually trying not to push too much, right? So these are three challenges I can specifically cite in the 0 to 1 journey.
Thanks, Deepu. Abhishek, what about you? Can you take us through some of the mistakes that you made and how did you go about fixing them?
No, I think we had the privilege of seeing a lot of startups before we started, but I think you make your own set of mistakes. You will make your own set of mistakes. There's nothing you can do about it. So in our case, in early days, there was a very clear PMF. Every time we were meeting a customer, like 70% of the time they will say yes and pay us somewhere in the vicinity of let's say $1,000 to $2,000 a month to buy our product. So it felt everything too easy, and we started diversifying very early, and we launched a bunch of new things, and then suddenly competition showed up, and one or two platforms started to scale up really well. And that is when we had to go back to drawing board and say, look, all these diversification has to stop. We have to focus on our core markets and core offering and just double down on that. And after that, we have sort of stuck to it. We realized over time that great companies are created when you take one problem and stay at it for like, not maybe just 5-10 years, maybe about 20 to 50 years. And that's when you deliver something which is really, really good. So it's all about picking one problem and solving it better than everybody else, instead of trying to solve 5 problems and being good at all of them. And I think that is one of our biggest learning.
Right, because including the founders are not used to scale. Like we scaled almost nil revenue to almost $70 million revenue in span of 2.5 years. So none of there was no people process. And the rest of the scaling was more gradual, right? So then you have a certain percentage year-on-year growth. So then by the time you have people who are experienced, you have a CFO, all of this to take it. So I think the scale problem happens from that early product market of it. Standard number one problem is people. Essentially, nobody has experience in doing that scale. Your HR will not work, right? That was in our case, because our HR is used to seeing 10 or 12, 15 people. Suddenly you can't manage 100 people, right? So second, your culture will go for a ride, because it would have been very much of a close friends and family culture. You go out together, you drink together, you move around together, versus and you have that insider versus outsider kind of a feeling settling in. And so a lot of people later problem happens, but I think these are not problems, right? This is a great state to be. This is magical, right? Because your product is working and money is coming to bank and you just need to fix. But I think it's good to know, because I think a lot of people are aspiring to reach there. So let's hope you get to that. So number one is people. Second, I think a very standard set of problem, right? Like you cannot scale your sales with people after a point, right? So you need sales systems and process and even sales technology, right? So you basically cannot have one-on-one, or you cannot scale 1:1. Then of course product and engineering becomes a big mess. Whatever your release cycles will get delayed. Probably your product architecture even, there was scenarios where I've seen scenarios where the CTOs or the co-founders have to step aside as CTO and bring in an experience in you. So and then I think third and finally is finances. Probably because of whatever is actually happening here, that takes a big precedence here, because like it or not, all of the scaling, growing companies at one point will require either funding, exit, or any of that. Now, if your books are not in a good shape and your cap table is not good, I think I just want to take a pause here and highlight one very, very important issue I find in some of the Kerala startups I have invested. It's that the cap table is messed up. The cap table is extremely messed up. You have your relative, you have your neighbor, your friend, your family, all of them in the cap table. You have given way too much equity to non-founders. And I have a very good example of a very recent popular startup where the founder was left with nothing because he had like 5 NRI investors, and we have these NRI investors coming everywhere. So you always have an NRI uncle or a relative or a brother who put 20 lakhs and ask 50% equity, right? So the cap table becomes a big issue. So I think anybody who's in the early stage, I totally request you to go and look at your cap table and see if it is a founder-friendly, investment-ready cap table, and does it really, reflect the true value. I mean, that's a whole other topic. So coming back, I think putting your book and finances in order, that also is a pretty much challenge you face. But again, right, these are all good problems to have.
Abhishek, while at Tracxn and while at Tracxn, you've seen a lot of startups achieving PMF and getting some traction and then fizzling out while it's scaling, at the scaling out stage. So can you share a few examples or maybe cases so that the founders here can build a scalable model?
I think one of the probably two big categories of reasons. One is you have a great product market fit, but there isn't a profit pool to chew into. And I didn't want to go into specific of a company, but we had one company which was solving like needs for a traveler. So they had a lot of reviews, they had a lot of content, they had a lot of material about helping people plan their travel and tourism. But eventually and there are millions of users using them, when it went into monetization, we realized that the profit pool was not able to pay for the cost of eventually service being served. And that turned out to be, I think, a common trend that I saw again and again, lack of profit pool in the market you are going after. Is a serious, it's not something you can change once you are in it. And second is, I think, not able to figure out a great GTM or distribution model. Like you build a product, but customer is looking at a particular point of time, it requires a certain GTM. If you don't do a great job at it, then it becomes harder and harder to acquire a customer at a price point which is usually defensible. So in both these cases, I think the availability of profit pool and the money it takes to sell to the customer and then take that money out is the big bottleneck. So PMF happened in early days because customer is using it and they find it as the right answer, but can you make enough money solving that problem is a big thing that people discover later sometimes that it's not there as much. And I think that is a common thread I've seen again and again in companies. So before you start, like, do a lot of research on profit pools, not just in your market, in adjacent markets, and see are there companies which are making ton of money. And I'll give you an example. Like we saw a lot of food companies out here, packaged foods. If you are starting a packaged food company, see globally which are the largest packaged food companies, what profit pool they are sitting into, how much profit pools, which categories. And actually you will find a positive reinforcement because packaged food companies actually make a lot of money. But it will help you figure out if there is a profit pool for you to go after and which categories are amenable to it and which are not. So profit pool is a big factor which you realize after PMF and then sometimes you run into a lot of problem. Execution capability is another thing. A lot of times PMF is there but founders don't have the right skills to scale that company. And usually board is always in a double mind, specifically in our markets because professional hired CEO not so far has been very successful. So I think if somebody from a functional background starts a company and they need a business person to eventually run it, that transition usually haven't gone so well. So broadly, execution capability and profit pools are the two big reasons from what I've seen.
Thanks, Abhishek. We're almost running out of time, but then I would like to ask one last question to you, Deepu. Deepu has invested in quite a few startups from Kerala. So what would you say? Like, are there a few things that you would like to tell them as probably some guardrails?
Yeah, I think, of course, there used to be a very specific definition for a startup, I believe, 5-6 years back. The Y Combinator or Paul Graham, all of them used to say that you need tech, you need scale. And we are seeing a very different thing, at least personally, right? You are seeing completely non-tech companies, D2C, scaling, of course using technology as a... I think specifically Kerala, I think we need to pay with our strength, right? So be it whatever vertical you are picking up, you need to really be very realistic about it. The point, if I pinpoint, that if you're actually building a deep tech startup in Trivandrum versus you're building a, say, textile or a services, you can really think which will have an edge over when you're competing globally, right? So I think picking a vertical which has a very realistic business potential rather than going beyond the hype or whatever is actually in the market, because you're actually trying to build that alpha by unique things. So I'll cite an indirect example of a startup which I know in Technopark. They build great product, but their biggest arbitrage is that the employee cost is very low and the talent is quite high, and all of them have worked for 6-7 years. So an equivalent Bangalore startup would have gone through at least $5-10 million of funding just to build that, and this startup could achieve it without doing anything, right? So one is play by strength. and rather not chasing what is actually out there, because we are no longer saying that a startup has to fall into a very specific definition. The second thing I mentioned, the cap table. Although you can actually pay with the strength, you don't want to reinvent the wheel in many things, right? That is basically basic company incorporation, who are the founders, founder vesting, cap table, etc. These quite and more information is out there online, but because essentially you have to believe you're spending your decades worth of effort, blood and sweat for whatever is in that shares, right? The number of shares you hold, the percentage of shares you hold is your biggest incentive mechanism for your teammates, employees, all of them. So create ESOP structure, make clean cap tables, read online, be very cautious about bringing in external capital, which brings to the third point, is that there will be always dearth of capital, and there will be people who are coming to invest. Of course, if you have a privilege of take money from angels, VCs, etc., but if that's not the case, try to with your investors very clear. That's all.
Thank you so much, Deepu. Thank you, Abhishek. I hope you found the session useful. You can find both these speakers out there, catch them and pick their brains. Thank you.